Despite Spotify's massive popularity and lovable brand, it's still losing money and struggling to produce a self-sustaining business. Spotify was founded in 2006 by Swedish entrepreneurs Daniel Ek and Martin Loryn. Not many people know this, but the name Spotify is actually a portmanteau of the words spot and identify, in which they believe that the music you listen to is a reflection of your identity. The company makes most of its money from its premium subscriptions and advertisements. Its content is both music and podcasts. In fact, the company spent around $1 billion on its podcasting business. The platform has 551 million users, where 220 million of them are premium subscribers. This is much higher than its biggest competitor, Apple Music, which boasts a premium subscriber base of just 88 million. So, how come with this huge number of paying subscribers and global reach, Spotify just can't seem to make a profit? Hi, and welcome to another episode of Dark Mode Digest, where we explore today's most important topics in tech. In this episode, we'll delve into how Spotify grew in popularity, the fundamental problem with its business, its billion-dollar investment in podcasting, the tough competition it faces from tech giants, and what the future holds for the company. Here we go. Spotify was founded in 2006 at a time when the internet was taking off with consumers and the music industry was facing a huge problem with piracy. One of the first companies to revolutionize the music industry was Apple. In 2001, Apple released iTunes, a simple music player for Mac computers where consumers could purchase individual songs for 99 cents and albums too. At the same time, Apple released the iPod, a portable music player that could fit in your pocket. This, paired with iTunes and Macs, skyrocketed Apple's popularity among consumers. With these new products, the industry began replacing physical purchases with digital downloads. However, this came with a catch. As music evolved from hard disks to digital files, so did illegal ones. The industry saw a rise in illegal downloads, which put a huge dent in profits, harming music labels and, more importantly, artists. Thus came Spotify. Swedish entrepreneurs Daniel Ek and Martin Loryn started the company to solve this problem and make it easier and cheaper for consumers to listen to music. The founders spent over 2 years building out their first version of Spotify and released it in 2008 to several European countries. Then they released the platform to the US in 2011. The founders pioneered a new business model for content. They offered a freemium model where some of its services were free and others were paid. They would offer a free ad-supported plan and a premium plan for unlimited music listening that costs a monthly fee. Although there were other music services out there, nothing was quite like Spotify. Instead of having to pay for each song on iTunes or having to illegally search and download each song for free on sites like Pirate Bay, injecting all kinds of viruses in your computer, Spotify provided the convenience consumers didn't know they wanted. Spotify differentiated itself by providing unlimited streaming anytime you wanted, a good user experience, and giving users real-time instant playback. This model became so popular that other companies copied it. Netflix followed this model a year later for movies and shows. Spotify was the platform for music streaming, and it still kind of is today. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, it's struggling to stay afloat. To understand why, we first must examine its business model and revenue breakdown. Spotify has grown to a total of 551 million users across the world, with 220 million being paying subscribers. This means that 220 million of its users are paying $10.99 per month to stream unlimited, high-quality music ad-free. 88% of Spotify's revenue is generated by its premium subscriptions, which equates to $10.94 billion in 2022. The other 12% is from ads, which equates to $1.57 billion. This is a lot of money, and Spotify has a market cap of $30 billion. But the fundamental problem with Spotify isn't necessarily its revenue or costs, it's the core nature of its business. It's obvious that Spotify has to pay royalties on its music since it doesn't own it. But how it pays for them isn't so obvious. Contrary to what you may have heard, Spotify doesn't actually pay artists and record labels per stream. It pays according to what's known as stream share. Spotify calculates stream share by tallying the total number of streams in a given month and determining what proportion of those streams were people listening to music owned or controlled by that specific artist and music label. So it's not quite accurate to say that Spotify pays a certain fixed amount per stream, but in general, about 70% of these payments go towards royalties and the remaining 30% goes back to the company. And these are just costs from royalties. Spotify also has a ton of other costs like employees, offices, sales, marketing, PR, product development, servers, and its constant legal battles. The average salary for a Spotify engineer in the US is $145,000 a year. Spotify in 2022 had a net loss of $459 million, which was a 1,026% increase from 2021. It's never made a profit and has a cumulative net loss of $4.2 billion. This lies the fundamental problem with its business model. The more users Spotify gains, the more they'll stream and the more it'll cost. This means that as the platform grows, its expenses also increase significantly. This is why music streaming is a tough business. In a world where music rights are owned by a few big companies, you're essentially slaves to these companies and they're not pushovers. Spotify's brand and music selection have propelled them to be the leading music streaming service around the world. In fact, it's beating tech giants like Apple and Google in market share. This graph shows Spotify has roughly 32% of the market versus 15% for Apple or 13% for YouTube. There was a time when some music was only available on certain platforms, and each platform had its own unique design and features. But nowadays, all music is generally available on all platforms, and the user experience is generally all the same. So there isn't much differentiation anymore. Spotify was the first to introduce the viral marketing campaign known as Spotify Wrapped, which allowed users to view a compilation of their listening activity on the platform over the past year. And now, Apple Music has copied them and introduced its own end-of-the-year campaign. So, in an effort to further differentiate itself from other music apps, Spotify saw a big opportunity in podcasting. Let's delve into this. Spotify went on a spending spree once they saw a big opportunity in podcasting. It spent $140 million to buy a podcasting platform called Anchor. It then spent $800 million on exclusive content just for its platform. Content like the Michelle Obama podcast, Kim Kardashian's The System, Meghan Markle's Archetypes, and media companies like Gimlet, The Ringer, and Parcast. The most notable exclusive content was the Joe Rogan Experience, in which it spent a whopping $200 million on it. Spotify was clearly in investment mode. By growing its audio selection, Spotify hopes to keep existing customers on its platform and grow new users. It also allows them to explore other monetization strategies like ads, for example. Spotify has a ton of user data and listening habits, perfect for advertisers. So, podcasting was essentially cheaper. It didn't have to serve music labels. Spotify's strategy here was to bring more and more studios and content in-house to build out its own original content, similar to what Netflix has done with its own original content. Spotify has 0 podcast listeners in 2015 and now has over 100 million podcast listeners on its app. It's now the biggest publisher in the US. The company told investors that it expected its podcast division to be profitable by 2024. Spotify is nowhere near profitability. It was spending $250,000 per show made by Gimlet. Many of its exclusive podcast creators like Michelle Obama left to join other platforms. Consumers just aren't listening to it as much as Spotify had hoped. This has led the company to cancel most of its shows at Gimlet and Parcast and lay off approximately 200 employees from its podcast division. With all this going on, what exactly is the future of Spotify? Spotify really believes in podcasting. It sees it as the savior for its business since there are no music labels involved. Investors are getting sick and tired of waiting for returns on their investments. They now want to see profitability above growth. For Spotify, this is now the focus. Its next phase is profitability. The company is focusing on building its ads business and selling tools and ads to different podcast creators. It wants to build better tools for creators to make new shows. Spotify executives have had talked about becoming more like YouTube by selling ads to run with creators' content and sharing the revenue. The profits made here would help offset the royalty costs from their music division. But Spotify continues to face tough competition. It's fighting against the biggest companies in the world: Apple with Apple Music, Google with YouTube Music, and Amazon with Amazon Music. The issue here is that music streaming for these tech giants is just a tiny fraction of their business. For Spotify, it's everything. Apple, Google, and Amazon are all trillion-dollar companies. They can afford to pay royalties and keep the lights on for their audio products. Spotify can't, which is why it's investing heavily into podcasts. So this leads to the question, why don't Apple, Google, or Amazon lower their prices to essentially kill their competition like Spotify? In short, because they're not allowed to. Music labels won't let them because they know the lower price point would become the new normal. This would force a race to the bottom by the streaming platforms, and they would never again be able to raise prices. This would lower profits for everyone. Definitely good for Spotify though. So why does Spotify keep losing money? Because of the high royalties it needs to pay and the tough competition it faces with tech giants. The company continues to innovate and invest in research and development, but this can only last so long. Spotify is currently staying afloat through investor money, but this will essentially run out. As we've seen, investors want to see profitability and a return on their investments. Spotify could get to some sort of profitability in say 10 years, but it's bleeding cash every day. And in 10 years, it could be too late. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed this episode, check out my other mini tech documentaries. Catch you later.